So I'm here to tell you a little bit about my healing system called Reyad Sekh Em, and how it evolved. And we do a little demonstration as well for somebody if they're willing to be our participant for the hour, or part of the hour. And I'll also demonstrate a bit of the sounds. But it's also a participative talk, because we will be drawing a symbol as well, if you'd like to have a go at doing that. So, to start off with, this is the name of the healing system, Reyad Sekh Em, Egyptian healing. The word Sekh Em, we'll come back to a little bit later. You might have seen it spelt in different ways and pronounced in different ways. And I'll be talking about that when we come to a later part of the presentation. Can you all see the board? Yeah. The screen? Okay, well then very quickly, just to give you a bit of my background, when I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, my father had his own chain of shops, travel agencies in fact, and he considered illness very weak. Do any of you have that recollection of your family? That illness was something that wasn't tolerated really in our family. And I can remember when I had tonsillitis actually at 18, I was going into school to do my, I think it was GCSEs or mocks or something, A-level mocks. And I was feeling really sick, and my father was going, "Oh, I had to fly a bombing mission feeling worse than this." It was all very difficult. So it turned out I had tonsillitis, but we didn't know then. So illness didn't really feature, but I tell you, if it did feature in our household, we would have gone to the doctor. That would have been the first port of call. So that was my upbringing. Probably, if I'd been introduced to healing at that point in my life, I would have considered it was very much the domain of the tree-hugging hippie. Not that there's anything wrong with the tree-hugging hippie, but that probably wasn't where I felt myself fitting into the social scheme of things, so I probably wouldn't have really shown any interest in it. So my background is very scientific. I did a degree in psychology, a postgraduate certificate of education. I worked in the travel industry training board as a trainer, telephone techniques, selling skills, public speaking and so on. And subsequently then discovered healing and went on into that business myself, do a bit of freelance writing, and I take trips to Egypt and sometimes around sacred sites in the UK. So quite a business corporate-y background really. Now, how I got into this particular form of healing is really synchronistic. Are you familiar with that word? How things happen as what seems to be a coincidence, but it leads to an outcome that you never would have dreamt was possible. So my father died when I was 30, and I was working for his business at the time. Within a month of his death, the Gulf War had happened. This is the first Gulf War in 1990. And unfortunately, because our industry was the travel industry, nobody was travelling at all. And our business was already in quite a bad financial state when he died. So at the age of 30, I found myself as managing director of a company that was trading insolvently in the middle of a war, where nobody was travelling. So it was pretty much baptism by fire. And I only tell you that because although we survived that, and we managed to trade for another 5 years, and we sold out, and it all went okay in the end, it really was a case of living on a day-to-day basis, and a huge amount of stress was internalised during that time. Something which I probably wasn't really aware of. I think when you're in that situation, you do focus on surviving on a day-to-day basis. And it's only when you look back and realise the severity, because our debts were really up to about £250,000, a lot of money in 1990, a lot of money any time. There's a lot of money then. And, you know, we really were looking down the barrel of a shotgun for many months trying to stave off that potential bankruptcy. So years later, having forgotten all about that, having sold my business, having had my children, having got a little bit interested in some of the peripheral natural healing systems people had told me about, it being a good idea to take your children to see an osteopath, so I'd done that. I'd dabbled with a bit of lavender oil and that sort of thing. And I don't know if any of you would feel a connection with what I'm going to say next, but I'm not a person who does things by halves. You know, if I get interested in oils, the next thing I've got 40 different oils in a little box sitting somewhere, and I'm reading all about those. And then I get interested in crystals, and I have to have the whole supply, you know, everything. Batch flowers, I've got the lot. Aurasomas, didn't buy all the bottles of those because I couldn't afford to, but I certainly would have done if I could have done. So I'm somebody that gets very passionate if something really touches me. I can really put all of my energy and enthusiasm into it. So At that point in time, my main job was freelancing for a company called Dorling Kindersley. I was selling books and CD-ROMs and encyclopedias, some of which were very, very heavy, as some of you may know. And because I'd had a business background, my team was going very well, and I was invited to speak at their conference. And it was the first businessy thing I'd done since I'd left and had my children. So I joke it was my first opportunity for big hair and power suits, you know, for a few years. And I came up, I even had the graveyard slot immediately after lunch, you know, when everyone was asleep. And it went really, really well. I even got a standing ovation, so I came off and I was really full of myself, you know, because it was a really lovely experience having had years of being a mum and struggling at home. So this guy comes up to me and he says, "You need some healing." And I think the expletives I would like to have said probably wouldn't be repeatable now, and I was certainly extremely offended and thought it was blinking cheek of the bloke, really. And because I didn't know anything about healing, really, only these oils and a few dabbly bits on the side, I heard what he said as, "You're obviously a nervous wreck after that talk and you need some help," you know. But that wasn't what he was saying at all, but I didn't know different. So my stunned silence he took to mean, "Yes, please." So the next thing he did was he came up behind me, I was sitting actually, put his hands on my shoulders, and I have to say that it was as if an albatross flew off. You know, I didn't realise how weighed down I'd felt until that moment when it all lifted. So this was about 1998, I should think. My father had died in 1990. So I said to the chap, "What's that? You know, what are you doing?" He said, "Reiki." So I reckoned if that was 2 minutes of Reiki, I definitely had to have a full session quickly. So decided to book a session with this guy, and he lived quite a long way away. So I had a healing day at my house, which was a complete nightmare. If anybody's tried to organise something like that, I think he wanted 8 people to make it viable. So I got my 8 people by persuading them to bring their terrible children with them who was going to scream the place down, and I'd look after them while they had their session and all this kind of thing. Lunch for 11 and, you know, all the nightmares that you wouldn't want to imagine. And by the time it was my session, which had to be the slot nobody wanted, I was a nervous wreck and ended up with the most god-awful headache that lasted the best part of 3 days. And I can remember standing there with this thumping head thinking, "I've just paid for this," really heavily, money and effort. So that could easily have been the end of my healing career. It wasn't a great start. Having had the great start with the, you know, the very initial feeling, this next experience was somewhat disappointing. But various things happened within the next few days. For example, my mother, who'd had various breakdowns, mental breakdowns, and lots of problems, she was an OCD, sweeping, used to get through a broom every 3 months, which takes some doing. And so she phoned me the next morning to say, following her treatment, she'd had the first embryonic feeling of joy for 40 years. And that's pretty astounding, isn't it? And various others of the 7 or 8 people who came to my healing day started to report back with really amazing results. So after about a month, I decided I could stand another 3-day headache. I decided this time to take my mother to see the healer, and I'd have another session myself and see how I fared this time. And sitting there in the waiting room, a little sign caught my eye, "Learn Reiki 1, £95. And I remember thinking, oh, that's less than 3 treatments. So the honest truth is that my original path into becoming a trained healer was financially based on the fact that I could then help my mother without having to take her anywhere. And the second session I had with this gentleman was very positive as well, so I didn't have the headache afterwards. And he told me the headache was probably what they call a healing crisis. Have you heard that word before? So this was really his way of explaining all those years of us wondering what was going to happen tomorrow and whether the bank were going to foreclose, all these sort of things, all suddenly coming up for healing. So I guess he was right, because I certainly had positive results after that. And like a lot of people, having done Reiki 1, I became completely hooked. You know, I was really hoping all my friends fell ill so I could heal them. You know. You must have a headache, surely. So this was the start of it, and it soon became the usual obsession, you know, that we had to know everything about it. And I think I would very easily have persevered down a Reiki path. I think Reiki is fantastic. I think what's really good about it is it's simple. You don't have to understand it for it to work, but it's very, very deep level and, say, it really changes people's lives. But I was on such a mission to really go that my Reiki master wasn't actually doing a level 2 course fast enough for